Well, hello, my friends. How are you all? Well, welcome to Berkeley Springs, and to all of those of you who are joining us by live stream. We're coming to you on what's ultimately going to be a sunshiny day here in the Appalachian Mountains, and we're happy to have you here for Transition Talks. We've got a double header going today. Robert Edward Grant will be with us in the afternoon, and we're looking forward to that. And we've got another very interesting presentation here this morning from Harlan Emil Gruber. Harlan is, it'd be an understatement to say he's an interesting guy. He is an artist and a sculptor and a mathematician and a regular at Black Rock City out in the desert in Burning Man, and he is. And this is an interesting combination because Harlan has spent a lot of time thinking about and building kind of not structures and ultimately, and he's going to talk to us about it, architecture that is related to some of the principal mathematical kind of and geometric constructs of this whole planet. And so, Harlan, it's so nice to have you with us, and we appreciate you coming, and come and show us some pictures.
My mic up? Okay. Can you hear me okay? Mark has got to get my mic going here. Is it turned off? It might have went off. Oh, boy. Technical difficulties. Oh, here, I got it turned on. And? I got to turn this on. Oh. All right. And check. 1, 2. Check. Well, we'll get the levels turned up and get the show on the road. Okay, how's that working? Check. No, not yet. Did I do? Oh, there we go. Hey, perfect. Okay, thank you, John, so much for having me here today, and thank you all for coming today. I'm extremely grateful and honored to have you here. And so, one of the things I like to do for doing a talk, both for my own benefit and everyone here, and of course, I think the idea that to do a few breaths together. And of course, that is the definition of it, to be in conspiracy. So we might all be conspiracy theorists, but we're going to actually just take a few deep breaths to ground in, and just, from your heart, send your energy spiraling down to the center of the earth, and just feel your energy connect with the earth, its crystalline grid, and feel it receive that. And then just bring it back up through a spiral, back through your feet and up to your heart, and now spiral it all the way up through the sun, center of the galaxy, to the center of all creation, center of the universe. And again, feel it just ground in there, and it receives you, and it brings that energy spiraling back down and just to your heart, and just connecting to the earth, to your heart, and to the universe. We'll take just a couple of breaths to ground in together today. All right, so I like to pack a lot into my talk, so I'm going to go pretty quick through a lot of things. So if you don't get it all, that's okay. These talks are on my website, on my YouTube channel, so you can go back for reference, because I like to cover pretty much everything that I've been doing the last 45 years of my life. And the way this is divided into two parts, just as my book, which I just self-published a couple of years ago, contains all this information. And so the first half of the book, and the title of the book is Portals to the New Earth, Sound, Sacred Geometry, and Grid Energies for Personal and Planetary Transformation. So the first half is how I use sound, sacred geometry, and grid energies in these installations, which you could see the first one on the cover of the book, for personal transformation. And then we'll take a little break and come back for the second half of the talk, which is really what I'm all about and why I do all this work, which is planetary transformation. And so this talk is pretty much structured like the book in these two parts, just as the book is divided in two parts. And we're going to kick off with sound, the cornerstone of creation. As the scientists say, everything started with the Big Bang. But in the Bible, it says first there was the Word. So, it comes from both directions, from the scientific and from the metaphysical, that sound is the formative force in the universe. Back in the 1800s, these Chladni plates, I think that's the name of the scientists that put sand on a plate, vibrated them at different frequencies, and they make these perfect geometric patterns. You can go online and find videos that show these vibrations shifting from one to another to shift the patterns. And more recently, though, people have been working with this by vibrating water. So this is called cymatics. And these are actual just pictures of sound vibrating water with light on it. And here's another beautiful one. I think this is done by someone named Mr. E. Scholar. So these are somewhat two-dimensional in nature, even though it's the surface of the water is vibrating somewhat three-dimensionally. But there's this incredible Eastern European professor, artist, scientist, Gabriel Kellerman. And he has this book out that you can actually look up online called The Universal Hermetic Harmonic Principle. And this is just one plate out of hundreds that show these three-dimensional representations of how sound can vibrate matter into these spiraling forms. And interestingly enough, I found someone through Facebook named Mikey Bergman that has created these three-dimensional forms. He calls it the Spiral Sound Temple. You see that this is all in spirals, and these are phi ratio spirals. So these are three-dimensional structures that he's planning on actually building to be inside, to work with, just similar as my portal installations are. And he's just been working in these computer-generated images showing these three-dimensional sound vibrations that create these spiraling structures. The way that I work with sound is I'm a musician, and I grew up playing rock and roll, and I even had a new wave band, and I played bass guitar. And one day I was wanting to get the bass guitar to feed back, and I was like, what's the lowest note it can feed back? So what you see here is something that it took many years to finally build, and I don't actually use this version. I've made several versions. You'll see in a moment the version that I use in my installations at Burning Man. But what I did is I leaned the bass guitar against the amplifier and then tuned the strings to subsonic notes. I've never measured them, but you could see the string moving, and if you pluck the string, it wouldn't make a note. It's well below 20 hertz. So it's somewhere between 5 hertz and 15, which puts it right in the Schumann resonance frequencies and brainwave frequencies. Now, amplifiers and speakers don't actually reproduce those frequencies, and you can't actually hear subsonic notes. So what you end up hearing are the harmonics of that interacting. So here you see this video of what I poetically titled the quasar wave transducer. And you can actually see how the strings are moving, and you can even see the harmonics of the strings as they interact in this nonlinear dynamic, which is another word for chaotic or random way. And so you tune the strings, which I'd say intuitively, till it starts to make these sounds that build up and die down like a big cat purring. What you're looking at is a small amplifier, and the strings are mounted to a tactile transducer. In the original form of the quasar wave, the strings were just mounted directly on the speaker cabinet. And I just removed the speaker cabinet and put this tactile transducer. These are made for like movie theater seats, so you feel the explosions or bass frequencies. So that directly transmits the sound of the string back into the string to create this feedback loop. So I invented this many, many years ago and showed it around when I was living in New York City at various events. And it would just be sitting there making this rumbling, purring sound, and people would be like, oh, okay, and that's about it. it wasn't until, and as you'll see later on, when I started to build my installations at Burning Man that I put this inside of it, hidden away, that it actually came into its function. And there's just one last quick note that I want to mention, because this is such an important book, and I won't go into too much detail, but Richard Merrick wrote this incredible book, Interference, a Grand Scientific Musical Theory, that goes into detail about these harmonic structures of sound. And so that's basically all I'm going to touch on. I mean, I could do it, people, you could have a whole book or a whole 2-hour talk just on sound and vibration. And I just wanted to give this quick introduction because sound is so important, and I do use sound in my installations. So next, we're going to go through pretty quickly how I've been using 3-dimensional geometry in the designs of my structures. And this is something that ever since I've been building these structures at Burning Man since 2004, and I've been giving presentations on my work since 2008, and it always focused around this. So I've been developing this explanation of 3-dimensional geometry. So I love to include it in my talk, and I love to turn people onto this. And like I say, it's going to go pretty quick, so if you need to review this, you can easily access later. The key to all this isn't starting with the 3D geometry, but the golden ratio. So when I was studying design, one of the principles you learn about is this golden ratio, which is just you can take any length and divide it at a point where the shorter is to the longer as the longer is to the whole, which this diagram is showing, and it's an irrational number that's 1.6180 and then goes on infinitely in this random string. But because there's a 0 in the 4th decimal place, 1.618 is quite close to approximating it. And another way to understand this golden proportion or golden ratio is in this rectangle that is showing a way to construct it and just this relationship between these two lengths. So won't go into detail explaining this diagram, but you can kind of see that this is a way to construct and show the golden ratio. But what most people do know about the golden ratio is this idea of the golden rectangle. So it's a rectangle where the lengths of each side are in golden ratio, and then you can continually divide this rectangle into a square and a smaller golden rectangle, and that you see that going on. And then when you inscribe an arc into each of those squares, it makes what's known as the golden spiral. And here's a diagram I found that shows how the golden ratio appears not only all through nature, like in your finger, each digit is approximately golden ratio to each other. Even the orbits of the planets in the solar system are in golden ratio. Your belly button divides your height, golden ratio, and you see like pine cones, nautilus shells. And also, though humans have known about this, so ancient architecture and art all has been employing it. And as you see right in the center, even a pentagram, the lengths of the longer to shorter lengths in a pentagram are exactly golden ratio. But a very interesting thing about the golden ratio is the Fibonacci sequence, discovered by a scientist, mathematician in the Middle Ages named Fibonacci. And it's interesting because golden ratio is abbreviated with the Greek letter phi, and his name happens to be Fibonacci. But what he discovered is you just start with 0 and 1 and add them together to make a sequence. So 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3. Doesn't seem like it's going anywhere, but then it starts to diverge into 5, 8, 13, and once you get up to just 3 digits, 6, 10, and 987, and you divide them into each other, it becomes almost exactly the golden ratio. And as you'll see in this chart here, the higher up you go, it gets closer and closer to exactly the golden ratio. So it's another way to understand that just by starting with 0 and 1, that you generate this golden mean, this golden proportion. So we're going to get into why this is so important in my work a little bit later, but now we're just going to go through this whole basic primer on 3-dimensional geometry. So here are the 5 Platonic solids that the Greek philosopher Plato labeled and discovered to be only these 5 shapes that have all equal-sided faces, either equilateral triangle, square, or pentagons, and the same number of these faces are around each vertex. So I love this little animation I had made for my talk. This is the image that I use in my book that shows each one separately, but they also nest within each other. But this is one of my favorite things about them. You start with the tetrahedron, 4 triangles. You cut off the vertexes of it. It becomes the octahedron. So now you cut off the corners of the octahedron, each vertex. And this one is going to go and stop halfway because we're going to be talking about this shape a little bit more. At the halfway point, it's halfway to a cube. This shape's known as a cube octahedron. As you continue to cut the corners all the way off, it goes all the way to a cube. Now, if you were to cut the corners off of a cube, it would just go back to an octahedron. So what you do with a cube is you cut the edges off. And there's actually 2 ways to cut the edges off. They both make a dodecahedron. This is the classic Platonic dodecahedron, which is amazing. I mean, you saw that happen right before your eyes. You cut the edges off, and that's because there are 5 cubes inside of a dodecahedron. Well, here we go. We're cutting off the corners of the dodecahedron. It stops halfway to the icosahedron, the shape that has both the 12 pentagons of the dodecahedron and 20 triangles of what you'll now see is the icosahedron. So those are the 5 basic 3-dimensional shapes, the Platonic solids. And so we're going to spend a few more minutes exploring the relationships of these 5 shapes. So we'll go back to look at the diagram in my book that shows, starting with a tetrahedron, how when you cut off all the corners of a tetrahedron, it goes to the octahedron. And of course, we just saw this, that starting with either a cube or octahedron, it makes that shape halfway between the two, the cube octahedron. We're going to get into the shape because this is a really significant shape that Buckminster Fuller labeled the vector equilibrium. And so here is, again, just a static diagram showing cutting off the corners of each of them. Before we get to that cube octahedron, there's an interesting relationship between these 2 shapes, is that a cube is the dual of the octahedron. Octahedron's the dual of the cube, which means that when you place them inside each other, the vertexes of one touch the center of the faces of the other. Okay, so now we're getting into Buckminster Fuller, who I'm going to be talking about extensively in the second part of this talk. But this is so cool. What Buckminster Fuller discovered is you take a sphere of 1 unit radius. In a plane around it, 6 more will closest pack. 3 more closest pack below and above. And when you connect the centers of all these spheres together, not only does it make the cube octahedron, but it also makes 8 tetrahedrons all pointing into the center. And he labeled this shape the vector equilibrium because in engineering, they use vectors to determine if, like, a bridge will stand up. And you put your load on in a vector and the bridge in a vector, and if the bridge is stronger than the load, it's going to stand up. And if that vector is smaller, it will collapse. What's going on in this shape is the vectors from the center going out to each of the edges is the force of this shape wanting to explode. The vectors that are wrapping around in those hexagons are the forces that would want to make this collapse. If the vectors in the center were longer than the ones around the outside, it would explode. If the vectors on the outside were longer, it would collapse. They all are exactly the same length. So therefore, this shape is in perfect energetic equilibrium. Hence the name that Buckminster Fuller gave it, the vector equilibrium. And this is the static diagram that's in my book, showing this relationship of these 8 tetrahedron all pointing in and how it's generated by this closest packing of spheres. What Buckminster Fuller also goes into detail to show that this can be done infinitely out in frequency. So you see a 1 frequency, 2 frequency, 3 frequency of closest packings of spheres to show that this is an innate way that the universe operates in three dimensions. So he went on to show this, and it's a little complicated to see this, but this is what's known, what he calls the isotropic vector matrix. So this is a vector matrix that's composed in 60-degree angles. And that makes up a grid of octahedrons and tetrahedrons in all dimensions. And you can see kind of outlined a little bit that nesting of these cube octahedrons in the center to show that relationship. And so this is what he's proposing is the actual coordinate system that the universe uses, because this is completely structurally stable. Also, triangles are stable. We're used to seeing this, XYZ axis, 90-degree cubic vector matrix. And it's very practical and easy to understand that. But cubes inherently are not structural and would want to collapse. And the diagonals across each face are a different length, and the diagonals through the middle are different lengths. So this is not really the underlying coordinate system of three-dimensional space. It's just something that we are using now because of its practicality. Very interesting thing about starting with a cube, you do the diagonals through the center of the cube to the opposite corner. It makes these 6 pyramids pointing in. Take those pyramids, flip them out to the outside, and put them around the outside of the cube. It makes this shape that's known as a rhombic dodecahedron. Dodecahedron means 12. So there's 12 rhombic faces of it. The rhombic dodecahedron is the dual of the cube octahedron, and it also contains both the cube and the octahedron inside of it, touching all of its vertices. So this is quite interesting because this shape shows this relationship between this 60-degree grid and the 90-degree grid. So let's go back to the cube and find another relationship. Instead of going the diagonals through the center, you do diagonals on each face of a cube, and then remove the cube. Here is the star tetrahedron, also known as a Merkaba, which is actually an octahedron with 8 tetrahedron surrounding the outside of it. So, it's quite interesting in that this is 8 tetrahedron pointing out as opposed to the 8 tetrahedron pointing in of a cube octahedron. And it relates directly to the 90-degree grid of a cube just by putting the 45-degree diagonals on it to create it. So these two shapes, star tetrahedron, vector equilibrium, they're kind of the 8 tetrahedrons pointing out, 8 tetrahedrons pointing in. Well, most recently, the physicist Nassim Haramein discovered that by interpenetrating these two shapes, you come up with this 64 tetrahedron grid that he calls the structure of the vacuum. And in some ways, this is one step beyond what Buckminster Fuller understood about just the vector equilibrium of the cube octahedron, that this 64 tetrahedron grid is actually the underlying single coordinating system unit of how the universe operates, because it has both the inward pointing collapsing principle and the outward pointing radiating principle combined into one structure. So what's very interesting about this shape is that it's made of 8 star tetrahedrons all coming together in the center. So each star tetrahedron is 8 tetrahedron, and therefore 8 times 8, 64 tetrahedrons in this grid. So I love this little animation to clearly see how that comes together. So that's the radiating principle. They're all connected in the center in a radiating way. And this is the diagram in my book to show those 8 star tetrahedrons all coming together to form this 64 tetrahedron grid. This is the diagram that I had to show that not only does it have the star tetrahedron, which you could see outlined in red and orange, but there's a blue cube octahedron or vector equilibrium in the middle, surrounded by a double-sized yellow cube octahedron. So the inward collapsing principle of the cube octahedron are concentrically nested. And an interesting thing about this shape is that it's fractal. If you have all of these struts, you'd have the exact same thing half size, or if you double it, it'd be the exact same thing double, and you could do that infinitely. So it's fractal in its nature, and that's the diagram. And I actually been studying this for quite a number of years, so this is a photograph of one that I actually welded up to demonstrate this. And then the last aspect I'm going to show is that when this is projected in 2 dimensions, all of the intersections of this 64 tetrahedron grid line up perfectly with the flower of life. And when most people talk about sacred geometry, they're usually drawing and doing two-dimensional diagrams, of which the flower of life is one of the key diagrams. And that's all I'm touching on in my talk of two-dimensional geometry, but it's the correlation between this three-dimensional 64 tetrahedron grid aligning with that flower of life grid. Okay, we're almost through this craziness of all this stuff. Hope you're bearing with me. And I know I talk really fast, so I want to get to the good stuff, and I love talking about this now. So now we're back to the last two of the Platonic solids. The dodecahedron, 12 pentagons, icosahedron, 20 triangles. Just like the cube and the octahedron were duals of each other, these two shapes are like that, where the vertex of one touches the center face of the other. Another interesting thing, like I was explaining briefly before, is that when you cross the diagonals of the pentagon faces of a dodecahedron, it makes a cube, which then infers that there are 5 cubes inside of a dodecahedron. So that's another interesting relationship of our normal 90-degree grid of a cube with this more complex pentagonal geometry of the dodecahedron. So we saw this earlier, and we'll briefly just look at this animation, that by cutting the corners off of either of them, make this halfway shape an icosahedron, both 20 triangles and 12 pentagons. And here is the static version that I use in the book. Another relationship between the dodecahedron and the icosahedron is by stellating the dodecahedron, putting these 5-sided pyramids on it. You connect the tips of those pyramids, it makes an icosahedron. So these two shapes are very closely interrelated. And I use these shapes in the designs of these structures I've been building. And then the final shape, the rhombic dodecahedron. I only learned about this shape recently when it was mentioned in a video by Drumvalo Melchizedek. And here, I want to stop it for a second and go back. Let's see if we could stop it. And so, it's 30 rhombuses. And he was talking about how the Earth's energy grid is composed in part by this, and that this is actually what the Earth's energy grid is evolving to, and we'll be talking about that later. But what's so fascinating about this shape is when you cross the diagonals of these the long way, it makes an icosahedron. And then when you cross the faces the short way, it makes a dodecahedron. But what's really incredible about this is that these diagonals are an exact golden ratio to each other. So it's a golden ratio dodecahedron to icosahedron. And then it goes one step further, though, where you have both of them in there, and then you connect the intersections of these two icosahedron and dodecahedron, and you see them there in their solid form. And so by connecting where these two intersect, it goes to the shape that we just mentioned in green, the icosahedron. So the rhombic triacontahedron has all of the interrelationships of icosahedron and dodecahedron contained within it. So a very fascinating shape, and that's it. And I know this was a lot, but as far as three-dimensional geometry goes, this is really just scratching the surface, the basics. And I've researched it enough to know that I don't know that much more than this. But I really love sharing this because I really feel like this gives a good handle and understanding on the basics of that. So this is the diagram that I used to show what that animation shows. And we're just going to wrap this up with this diagrams that's from this book, Cosmometry by Marshall Lefferts, where you see, of course, the vector equilibrium, but he's also showing how it relates to these more flowing dynamic natures of the toroid and the spirals. And so incredible book. I can't recommend it enough. Marshall Lefferts is an incredible genius. You can see this is both the front and back cover of the book, and you can see some of the diagrams on the book, showing some of the things I talked about and a lot of other things that he's discovered that are truly profound. Just on the cover of the book, he's showing these golden ratio spirals in a relationship that show these 5 spiral boundaries that are the way that nature uses. Like, why doesn't the center of the sunflower just keep growing out infinitely? Why is it bounded in the center where the seeds are and then the petals? And he explains all of that. It's really beautifully done and well explained about these underlying principles of the geometry and how nature uses it. Okay, we got through three-dimensional geometry. Now we're just going to go very briefly through these ideas of ancient megalithic stone structures and the Earth's energy grid. What brought me to this was this book by John Michel, The New View Over Atlantis, which came out in the early 80s, and this really popularized the concept of ley lines and Earth energy grid in our modern time. He's one of the real pioneers that studied this and put this information out there. And shortly after I got that book, this is a compendium, it's edited by David Hatcher Childress, of all of these different essays about the world, the ley lines, the world grid, and also talking about anti-gravity. So this was a huge formative book for me. And another one that I didn't come across till after I actually built my first installation at Burning Man, the Emerald Motive. And now what's interesting is Richard Levitin had one of the best essays. The Anti-Gravity in the World Grid book was published in 1987, and I got it probably a month after it came out. This book was published in 2004, and I got it in 2005. I built my first installation at Burning Man in 2004, and someone said, do you ever think of putting your installations at like power spots, ley lines, Earth energy grid? And this book, as you can see the subtitle, A User's Guide to the Earth's Interactive Energy Body. And as you see, we'll talk about a little bit later on, that there's a green cube surrounding the whole Earth. And one last, so diving into this, Michael Tellinger has been researching these ancient stone circles all through South Africa. And he estimates that there's, I think, over 1 million of them. And typical archaeologists say, oh, they're like 10,000 years old or something. He is claiming that these could be well over 100,000 years old, and that there's actually properties to these. He's measuring frequencies in them and unusual energetic aspects. And you can see they look a little bit like those cymatic patterns. And he is feeling that these are actually interacting with the Earth's energy body in an energetic way. So that goes way back in time with those, and they're not very widely discussed or researched, but Michael Tellinger is the primary person that's writing about them and publishing this information. So of course we all know about the huge pyramids in Egypt and the fact that they're mysterious and work with energies in unusual ways, and of course Robert Edward Grant is the most cutting-edge researcher right now, making incredible discoveries. And then England, covered with stone circles. I don't even show Stonehenge because we all know that, but the largest stone circle is Avebury. And I love how, people have settled in the middle of it. And then all over the world are dolmens. The one with the little hole in it is, I think, somewhere in Russia or Asia, where they found thousands of them. And the other one, I think, is Ireland. But there are dolmens in the United States. In Korea are thousands of them. These are discovered everywhere. The ancients were working with stone, making these structures, and they're really quite mysterious. And that's just a whole huge avenue that, even in Montana, there's an interesting website called Montana Megaliths that someone's been discovering huge megalithic structures there. So, like I say, I just want to briefly touch on these ideas that the ancients knew about the Earth's energy grid, interacted with it in ways by building these structures. And this is a grid by a couple called Becker-Hagens, that they are one of the more acknowledged of understanding the ley lines and showing this Earth grid as a geometrical shape. And what you could see is they use different colors to outline the different grid lines. But in white, you can start to see that there are these rhombic shapes. And then this is actually a globe of the Earth that's made in the rhombic triacontahedron. So even though this is spherical, you could see that the rhombic triacontahedron relates to the Earth's energy grid directly. And that's one of the things that I employed in my work. So that's the whole introduction to ley lines and megalithic sites. So now we're going to dive into how I employ all this information at these structures I build at Burning Man. But I need to preface it by saying that the reason why I build these structures and their whole intention is to use these principles to create a space for the evolution of consciousness, so that when people come to these, it will help connect them to this shift of consciousness taking place where they regard everything is sacred, and we would start to live accordingly to build and inhabit the earth in the most beautiful and sacred way. And so I started going to Burning Man the first year that it had this city layout, which was 1999. And what you see here is where people are camping in this circle that goes from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock out is open space where artwork is put. And in the very center is where the Burning Man is, and then out in that open space, and also in the central open area, are all kinds of art installations, and then within the city streets are where all the camps are. So I started going in 1999 with a group. I'd been living in Taos, New Mexico, and we had our camp, and just exploring all this crazy interactive art. And I remembered designing this shape when I was studying design in the 80s at Parsons School of Design, and I said, I can build that as a huge structure to put at Burning Man. So in 2004, and also it's a clock. You can tell people where your camp is or where your art is by the time on the clock. And so as soon as I thought that I'm going to bring this installation to Burning Man, I said, I know it's going to have to be at 11:11. A lot of people see 11:11 as some kind of wake-up or activation code. And the shape of it, and the name of it, Diamond Portal. So this is actually a paper model that I made in 1984 while I was studying design, environmental design at Parsons School of Design. And this is the diagram explaining how the shape is generated. In plan view, it's a diamond shape or a rhombic shape that's exactly 1/7 of a circle, so that there's 7 of them that fit to make a star. And interestingly, 1/7 is 51.43 degrees, which is very close to the angle of the Great Pyramid. In elevation, though, it tapers the golden ratio. Centered on the golden ratio is this circular cylinder that pierces through it. That is the golden ratio of the height, centered on the golden ratio. So the entire shape is generated by the golden ratio. And here's a little animation showing, starting with a square and then tapering it to the golden ratio, and then centering that cylinder, piercing it. That's exactly the golden ratio of the height centered on the golden ratio. But as you'll see, and here's the 7 of them that can fit into a star, but it's 1/7. And then you'll notice, though, that when you look at it from an angle, that perfectly round cylinder, because the taper of the shape, makes a perfect heart shape. I had no idea that this would do this. When I was making the little models, I didn't see that. And it was only when I actually built the full-size one, and you walk up to it and you look at that you can see the heart shape. And also for the color of it, I chose this chartreuse green color. At first I thought I would just make it flat black like the monolith in 2001. And I thought that would just be hot and show the dust. And this green color had come to me in a DMT vision years before. And I had this DMT experience that communicated through colors. And I went and I made this panel to embody this color that I had seen. And it was hanging in my studio when I was working on building the Diamond Portal in Taos, New Mexico. And when I'm thinking about, like, what color should I make it, the panel was right there on the wall, right behind where I'm working on figuring out the angles and the design. I was like, oh, I'll just make it that green color. That's a cool color. And at the time, though, I wasn't thinking that green is the color of the heart chakra. And then the inside, I made that complementary deep maroon, also kind of like a heart color. And then that cylinder makes the heart shape. And there's this thing called heart math, where when your heart rhythms are in golden ratio, that's when you're in a state of coherence. So golden ratio relates to the heart and brings you into coherence. So this whole piece became this incredible heart chakra-based installation just intuitively, without even planning it out. And so you could see people are leaning against the face of it because they're feeling the vibrations of the quasar wave transducer that's inside of it. And of course, the people that are in it right now are getting in or out, but people would lay on the inside of it, as you see in this picture. So this is a telephoto lens. You can see how the mountains that are way in the distance are big. This was taken standing over 500 feet away with a big telephoto lens because the man is a mile away. So if you're just standing right next to it, you can't see the Burning Man through it. But when you walk back a ways, and I had someone with a really good camera take this photo. So you see all the people lounging on the inside, getting the vibrations of the quasar wave, and looking back, way back at the city. Back then in 2004, Burning Man was not that populated. And you had to venture out a full mile and look back. You can see that the next closest things are very, very far away. It's no longer like that. There's hundreds and hundreds of art installations. And yeah, so anyway, had it there, 2004, brought it back to Taos, New Mexico, where it was put on display on the edge of town and sat there all winter. It got blown over in a spring windstorm, slightly damaged, but I rebuilt it, brought it back to Burning Man 2005, but not only brought it back, but I made a golden ratio smaller outline. The base of this one is the size of the top of the base of it. And so what I did, though, is I placed the golden ratio between the man and the diamond portal. And as you see, look at how empty the playa is. It really was just something that you saw way in the distance. You're like, what is that? And you'd go out there and you climb on the ladder and feel these vibrations. And then this one, of course, can be climbed on as well. So when I brought it back in 2005, though, I'm the type of person that saves everything from my whole life. I have all kinds of things I've collected from as a little kid. I don't like to get rid of anything. But my friends who helped me bring it there said, we'll help you bring it there, but we're not going to help you bring it back to Taos. You have to burn it. So we put it on wheels, and we wheeled it over to the temple, which was burned on Sunday night, and we rolled it into the temple, and that was the end of the diamond portal. Of course, the outline version has gone on to all kinds of events. This was actually an event in New York City, and this is at the Symbiosis Festival in California. And so that still exists to this day and is easily transported. Okay, so after it burned, this friend said, did you ever think of putting your portals on sacred sites? And that's when I got that book, The Emerald Modem, that talked about this green cube. So I came up with this idea, moving from 1111 to 1212, here's the cover of the book. Starting with a cube, I'm using the same green color. In the book, he talks about a green cube being inside of every human's heart chakra, but also a complete green cube around the earth that is the totality of the earth's energy. And it's a way that humans can connect to the earth's energy body. And it's a green cube pointing up. So by cutting off the bottom of it, opening up these square openings, I came up with this shape that I call the Emerald Portal. And here it is, freshly built in the studio in Taos, New Mexico. And again, hidden in the center of this one is the quasar wave. And this is one of the better sound representations, because we're going to duck inside and you're going to actually hear what it was like for people to climb into this or sit in the corners or sit on top of it. As we go inside, you'll get the real random purring, rumbling sound of it. Those are little green cubes in the corner for lights. Here it is on the playa with people enjoying sitting on top. And, you know, Burning Man can get quite hot and windy and dusty. And I know some people who told me they were out on the deep playa when it was way too hot and dusty, and they found shelter in the corners, and they were very grateful for it. I also built at the same time this outline version of it. So this shows the exact geometry, but much more clearly. And as you can see, there's a cube octahedron right in the center of it. So it's showing this relationship between the 90 degree of cubes and the 60 degree of the cube octahedron. And it went on to be displayed. This was at an event in San Francisco down at the piers. Okay, so now, for the next year of Burning Man, I'm reading this book, The Emerald Modem, The User's Guide to the Earth's Interactive Energy Body, and he talks about the icosahedron being a form that the Earth's energy body is evolving to. So I came up with this idea to make these nested geometries of the dodecahedron, icosahedron, and icosahedron. So this is a diagram that shows with these three shapes nested, and then in the lower corner, you see the structure that I came up with. But I thought, well, I'm not just going to put this out in the middle of nowhere. He also talked about this concept of blue etheric dishes that etherically collect cosmic energies to distribute into the earth and into the sky. So I came up with this idea for a huge blue dish. So this is this blue wall, 60 feet across, 10 feet high, that has these geometries in the center. And throughout the wall and in the center dodecahedron is the speakers for the quasar wave transducer. So you could see it accommodated quite a number of people. And it was there both 2007 and 2008. And we hosted sound baths. So this is a video of one of the sound baths. So the quasar wave is in the walls vibrating people, and there are people with didgeridoos, Tibetan bowls, vocals, all performing a sound bath. And this is what started me using the portals as spaces for sound healing and sound baths, which I've been doing ever since. And it was quite successful. You can see there's even a gong in the background. And the center section has gone on to be displayed at many different festivals. So it's a much more minimal aspect, but at least people can interact with these geometries. And let's see, we're going to go to the next one. It's using the stellated dodecahedron, of which I first made just a pipe structure of, but using that shape shows how I deconstructed it. And since the first two were green of the heart chakra, the blue, of course, is throat chakra, this one went to indigo, or amethyst, as I call it, of the third eye chakra, but the inside returns to the green of the heart chakra. This is actually just a cardboard model photoshopped to what it would look like at Burning Man. Here it is when I finished building it in Taos and out on the playa at Burning Man. With, of course, people that could, a lot of people could fit on the inside, but if you couldn't, you could lean around the outside. But you could see quite a number of people inside. And beautiful picture with the little subtle lighting on the outside. This went on to a bunch of other festivals. This is at Symbiosis. This is in LA at a Decompression, a Whole Earth Festival in Davis. And it even got shipped to Portugal for the Boom Festival. And here we are doing some sound baths at Lightning in a Bottle. This is thinking about those 5-pointed stars of that stellated dodecahedron. I combined this with the original diamond portal and came up with this idea for a heart star portal. This is a paper model representing it. I never built this full-size 16-foot tall version of it, but what I did build was the 10-foot outline. And this has gone to almost 200 festivals since I made it in 2010. And at Burning Man, I use it on top of my art car so we can get around and get a high point of view. Let's see, we're going to skip that and keep moving ahead with this octaportal inspired by Tom Kenyon's work on a meditation called The Whole of Balance. But much more recently, Sandra Walter has a meditation called 12-strand crystalline DNA activation, where you picture yourself in an octaportal by projecting a point above, below, in front, behind, and to each side, and connecting that makes an octahedron. So this was also made back in 2010, and I've actually made a number of them. It debuted at a party in New York City and found a home in a backyard in Brooklyn called the One Love Portal. And this one was built on my way to Boom Festival in the UK for Secret Garden Party. This was done at the Moksha Art Fair during Art Basel. And here is one that I brought to Burning Man in 2011, and also at this Conscientia retreat in Utah, and right in Florida, Okeechobee Festival. And one of the most recent was December 21st, 2020, at an event in Joshua Tree. And you see I put this EL wire around the edge of it, so it's beautiful at night. Brings us to, boy, I know there's so much information, and I really want to get through this and give us a break, but the rhombic triacontohedron. This is now 2012. I was invited to go to Rainbow Serpent, which is January 2012. And turquoise is the color of the higher heart. And I felt guided to use just turquoise to activate the higher heart. And this shape, as you saw, also relates to the Earth's energy grid, the evolution of it. So it's a space you can go inside to align your vibrational energy body with this evolution of the Earth's energy body. So I flew to Australia, found some people in Byron Bay, and we built one and brought it to the Rainbow Serpent Festival and also the Earth Freak Festival. Came back to the US, built another one with a different arrangement of openings, brought it to the Pyramid Eclipse out near Burning Man. This is at Beloved Festival, and of course it went to Burning Man. And you could see, though, even though it's not that large, there's a huge amount of space inside, like 30 people could fit inside, even though it's only about 15 feet across. So when you cross the faces, if you look inside, the panels are crossed. And as you saw earlier, this shape actually has both the icosahedron and dodecahedron. So if you remove the rhombic triacontohedron, you have that, what I call the new Earth grid star. And I actually, for December 21st, 2012, was in Chichen Itza, Mexico, where I made this with a good friend Sachi Om, helped me fabricate it. And this is on the morning of December 21st, 2012, the ceremony that used this new Earth grid star. So I was, in 2014 for Burning Man, I had this idea to do something opposite of the blue sapphire portal. And I was introduced to a group from Texas that was already making this thing called the Pachamama portal without a wall around it. So we collaborated, and I brought out this structure that had the quasar wave in the wall, and they brought out this huge Earth that was lit up at night, and people who sat in these lotus petal hammocks looking up at the Earth against the night sky, it actually felt like you were floating in space, looking down at the Earth from orbit. And that dodecahedron that's in the center was filled with all kinds of different sound healing musical instruments. There were didgeridoos and stringed instruments and drums. So it was quite an interesting overlap of our collaborations. The next year I brought it back and collaborated with this other woman that was been making these very interesting papier-mâché installations at the very deepest point of Burning Man. So that's where we put it, at 1155. And I also collaborated with another person that provided this wind and solar power for it. And you went inside, and it was this whole story of the reconciliation of duality that I won't go into detail, and I know I'm kind of over time on this first half, so you'll have to just watch the video. There's a short video, but this was during a meditation that we hosted on Saturday, the day the man was going to burn, that was in conjunction with Tom Kenyon, that was doing a global meditation called A Bridge Between the Worlds, where Tom Kenyon channels the Hathors in these sound healing. And we played for half an hour these Bridge Between the Worlds Hathor sound healing meditation that was being done all over the world through Tom Kenyon out at Burning Man. And so I'll let just the first couple of seconds play because it's such a great video, but in the interest of time, we're going to keep moving ahead. So be sure to go to my YouTube channel and watch the 1155 Reformation Portal video. Let's see, we got I'll just say hello. There you can just see it out there. Let's keep moving along. So I brought this structure back one last time. This is the only time I think I brought an installation more than 2 times to Burning Man, but it changed each time. And this is when I moved all the way to the very side of Burning Man. By 2016, Burning Man was getting very populated, and filled with tons of art, and it was hard to just go out to the deep playa and find a remote spot. But off to the side at 144, which is a very auspicious number, is still pretty open. So I brought the diamond portal, which you could see kind of fits the opening, and inside we just had very simple, each of the open bays had different ribbons and chakra colors. So you could see the blue of the throat, purple of third eye there, and over here you could see at the very back was a tea service in the green, and you could see yellow for solar plexus, and we brought sound healers out. So it was really just a wonderful experience to get away from Burning Man, off to the side, be able to sit down with a nice cup of tea or a sound bath and just relax. And actually people came up to me and they told me that they went to the temple to try to journal or meditate, and it was just so overrun and so busy. And when they came out to this space, they found what they needed to be able to just sink in and reflect. And this piece now lives in my backyard in Joshua Tree, and you can see we're hosting a sound bath there. For 2022, I had met this South African intuitive named Maria several years before, and we started planning this actually in 2019, where she had gone to Burning Man to do the energetic work that she does, but without a space to do it in. So I said, we can collaborate, and you can do it at a portal installation. So she channeled this vision of a 12-step pyramid, and she pictured it completely surrounded by circles. But I said, well, I don't know how to make circles, but we can make the arches that infer the circles, and they sit on this circle on the ground. And every sunrise and sunset, she would come out and do these meditations, chanting this light language. And you can see there's a little entrance on it also. You can be inside of it. And on the arches and the circles, though, were all these cutouts of this light language that she had channeled. So this was this incredible collaboration to do this work on this interdimensional space-time portal. And when you went inside, so the outside pyramid was the angle of the Chichen Itza pyramid, but 12 steps. Inside, we put an Egyptian pyramid, the angle of the pyramid in Giza. But for the walls, right when we were coming up to put on the inside, the James Webb telescope had just returned the furthest, deepest images of galaxies. So this is that cutting-edge, super deep field galaxies that ring the wall, and then it kind of fades so that the pyramid is kind of floating over it. And again, there's a wonderful short video of this, which you'll have to go and watch on my YouTube channel. I would love if it was quicker. We probably could have watched it. But so go to the channel. Here it is. It's now set up in Joshua Tree at the Joshua Tree Retreat Center, Institute of Mental Physics. And you can see in the background, now painted turquoise, is that purple amethyst stellated dodecahedron. So those are both accessible to the public. And I'm now working with Maria on a new project which she sketched out of a lotus flower, which we may be bringing to Burning Man this year if we can find the funding. Our art grant from Burning Man. Burning Man funds quite a number of art installations. They give out over $1 million, and our submission was not accepted. So that's what I'm up to as far as Burning Man goes. So like I said, this second part is just like the book. It's the second half of the book, and it's why I've been building all of those portal installations. Ultimately, I don't want to really be known as this sculptor artist that makes these interactive installations. I mean, I am, and that's what I do for the past 20 years. But what has really set me on this life's path was, as you'll see in a moment, when I first learned of Buckminster Fuller. And so I'm really all about conceiving future environments, the sacred re-inhabitation of Gaia. To that end, I'm just now scratching the surface of AI. And this was my first attempt of prompting AI to make what Paolo Solari would call an arcology, which is architecture and ecology integrated together into a three-dimensional megastructure city. And we'll be talking about Paolo Solari a bit in this presentation, but I figured I'd just kick it off with the latest, and we'll end it on this also. But it's kind of interesting to see, giving AI these prompts of just, make a three-dimensional integrated structure that's like a living organism. And that's basically the principle that I like to think. The design principle is to be exactly the same way that nature operates. And so on my website is a fabulous intro video that puts everything in a nutshell that you'll see here. And if I had more time in the talk, I was going to play it. It's just like 2.5 minutes long. But rather than use those 2.5 minutes to show the video, which you can easily see whenever you go to my Portal to the New Earth website, we'll just dive right in. So before I got interested in actually studying design, like I said, I was a bass player interested in playing music, but also I'm like into physics. So I was studying electrical engineering and wanting to like design instruments and amplifiers and speakers. And I didn't get very far in that, but when I was at University of Miami in their department of electrical engineering that was also overlapped with their music department in audio engineering, I only made it through one semester. But the house I was staying at, sitting on the coffee table, had this book. Now, this is 1979. I'm 20 years old, just scratching the surface of going to college, and I pick up Synergetics by Buckminster Fuller. I didn't know who he was until that fateful day. And this book just blew my mind. He coined the word synergy, which means the behavior of whole systems unpredicted by the behavior of their parts taken separately. And then synergetic geometry embraces all the qualities of experience, all aspects of being. It involves geometric modeling, exploring interrelationships in the facts of experience and the process of thinking. Synergetics endeavors to identify and understand the methods that nature actually uses in coordinating universe, both physically and metaphysically. And of course, one of his most famous quotes is, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." So I'd like to be proposing these new models that we could all start to employ to make this current old model obsolete. He's most well known as the inventor of the geodesic dome, and you can see him sitting here with various different things that he invented. And he did the 1967 Montreal Expo, that huge geodesic dome. And another famous quote, "It's now highly feasible to take care of everybody on Earth at a higher standard of living than any have ever known. It's no longer has to be you or me. Selfishness is unnecessary. War is obsolete. It's a matter of converting the high technology from weaponry to livingry." And here he is standing with two of his inventions. The Dymaxion car was actually invented in 1933. You know what cars looked like in 1933. They were very old-fashioned, big fenders, and here is this completely streamlined rear-engine, beautiful vehicle, but when he was displaying it, there was an accident, and they completely crushed the idea of ever producing these kind of cars. And then more recently, though, this huge fiberglass fly's eye dome, of which he made two different versions. That's the larger version, and there was a smaller one. And when I was studying at Parsons, I used that fly's eye dome to show how you could take a complete dome and fill it out with a home that could fit inside of it. So these are one of the models I built while I was studying at Parsons. So like I said, I first was studying electrical engineering. I dropped out, formed this new wave rock band, moved to New York City, didn't get too far with that, and that's when I found Parsons School of Design. But what I also found when I moved to New York City with that new wave rock band is there's all these incredible art galleries. I was down in Soho. I walked into a gallery, and covering the walls of the gallery in one huge scroll that went all around the gallery were these visions of these three-dimensional, ecologically integrated cities called arcologies by the Italian architect Paolo Solari, who was living out in Arizona. He had actually studied under Frank Lloyd Wright, and then in the 50s set off on his own with a place he built just outside Phoenix in Scottsdale called Cosanti, and then in 1970 got 800 acres between Phoenix and Flagstaff to build Arcosanti. Here's a detail of it. Now these arcology drawings, as you'll see, were never formally finalized into what could actually be built. They were just these abstract concepts of three-dimensional cities. And here he is actually very early on in the early 60s holding a model of one of these crazy arcology city ideas. And he had quite a bit of success in the 60s to the point where he was getting major gallery exhibitions, and he published a book in 1969 on MIT Press called Arcology, City in the Image of Man. This is the cover of the book, which is showing a cross-section through one of these arcologies. And his definition of arcology is in nature, as an organism evolves, it increases in complexity and also becomes a more compact or miniaturized system. Similarly, a city should function as a living system. Arcology, architecture and ecology as one integral process, is capable of demonstrating positive response to the many problems of urban civilization by recognizing the necessity of the radical reorganization of the sprawling urban landscape into dense, integrated, three-dimensional cities in order to support the complex activities that sustain human culture. Complexity miniaturization. The book's divided in two halves. The first half, I just give one example on top, where he has all these flow charts, where he's thinking about all these aspects of culture and civilization in these drawings, and underneath of it, there's some text that explains what he's thinking. The second half are these full, huge pages of these various different arcologies, where he'll overlay different visions of them all in one. You'll see on the very far side a little Empire State Building to give you a sense of scale. The Empire State Building being the tallest building at the time in the 60s, to show that these are many thousands of feet high and miles across. And I'm going to give a few more examples from the book showing these various sketches of them and how he was, thinking of these three-dimensional integration. Later on, through the, I think it was probably by the 90s, he came up with an idea of this lean linear city, where he's taking this three-dimensional megastructure and then having it run along a line. And what's so interesting about that, and I've never seen him give credit for it, but this piece was well developed many, many years ago, at least 30 years ago, is that in Saudi Arabia, they've been talking about building this over 100-kilometer long line city that's going to be completely sheathed in glass, and on the interior have everything that you need. And I know they've broken ground on it, but they keep scaling it back. And, I feel like what they're doing there in Saudi Arabia, in some ways, embodies these principles that we're talking about, but it's coming from this old mechanistic 3D mindset. It's not fully embodying the concept of the city as an actual living organism. So here's a view of Arco Santi, which he started building in 1970, and they were able to build up until the early 2000s. And since then, all construction has stopped, and he passed away in 2013. But it still exists. They still host events there. And it's, at the peak population, they maybe had 100, 150 people. And currently, there's maybe about 50 people that live there. And what he came up with to fund this is twofold. First, he would have people pay to come and learn his principles and do workshops. So this entire place was built by people paying to come help build it. But they also have these foundries and ceramic studios where they make these bells. And he actually got pretty famous starting in the 50s at Cosanti and all through the 60s. And to this day, they still make thousands of these bells and sell them all over the world. And this is a view of the foundry. And in the background is a public space called the Vaults. So here's a view inside of the vaults where people can gather. This is one of the main buildings when you come there, the visitor center. But on the bottom floor, as you can see, there's some apartments integrated in. And now here we're inside of this visitor center building. The upper floor is where they sell the bells. And then on the ground floor, or the middle floor of it, is a cafe. And as you walk outside this building, the first thing you see, though, is how this place is integrated into the landscape with this beautiful stone and concrete work and these series of stairs that bring you to the different parts of this sprawling complex. And the next view also shows how it's, this is kind of integrating the three-dimensionality into this, small, they call it just an urban laboratory. It's urban, but it's not a full city, being only 50 people working at the cafe or making the bells. But this is some stairs that go up and over to the top of the vaults, and you see apartments integrated into it. And this is just turning the opposite direction, looking at the back of that foundry building where apartments are all built around it. And this is one of the interesting contentions I have with how Paolo thought about this, is that foundries are very noisy, dirty workspaces. Apartments is where you want to be peaceful and quiet, and yet he integrated these two aspects together, which doesn't seem to be embodying the principle of how a living organism would work. I would think that you would want to put all the noisy, dirty, busy things in one place and the quiet living spaces far away from it. So, there's a lot of room for improvement there. On the other side of the complex is a huge amphitheater. And again, it's surrounded by apartments that look down into it, which could be nice, but also this is during a conference I went to that they held called Convergence in 2017 that they actually produced themselves. And as you can see, there's a few hundred people that came to that. I think that's Mark Lakeman presenting on his village building convergence. Was an incredible presentation. But most recently, from 2014 to 2019, a group came there and just rented the space to put these concerts on, and they came back this fall. It's called Form, and they completely sold out with thousands of people crowding into the amphitheater for amazing music. And in some ways it was incredible, but in some ways it was disrespectful and not in alignment with exactly how the space functions. So I was glad I got to see that and be there for it and to see it as a real thriving space. But like I say, there were certain aspects of it. So, I really love Paolo Solari. I consider him one of my biggest life's inspiration. And with him and Buckminster Fuller, and with my rock band not taking off and becoming famous, is when I decided to go to Parsons School of Design in New York City for a program they called environmental design. And one of the best things about art schools is you get all these art history classes. And there was one art history class where this image flashed up of this crazy crystal city on mountaintops. And very fortunately, this book got republished. Back in the 80s, the only way to access this work of Bruno Taut's Alpine architecture was to find an art history book that might have a couple of plates describing it, because the book itself was published in 1917 and was not available. In 2004, it got republished in totality, and it shows these incredible visions of both crystal cities on mountaintops, and these, of course, in black and white, that's a rainbow of a city in a canyon with water flowing through it. And here's another colorful one of another crystal city, and translated from German. Engage the masses in a great task, which fulfills everybody from the humblest to the foremost. Each sees in the great communality clearly the work of his own hands. Each builds in a true sense. And he really had a very spiritual view. And now, mind you, the state of consciousness in the world back in 1919 is nothing like it is today, and yet there was a lot of consciousness and people thinking spiritually, and he was seeing humans as being the spiritual organs of the earth, to build and beautify it not only for themselves, but for all life in these crystal cities. And so I really, really resonate with Bruno Taut, and I feel like, to continue with this vision of promoting these ideas of how we can build in this sacred harmony to beautify the earth in the most conscious and sacred way. Another thing that I learned about, interestingly, is the year I was born, 1959, William Catavalis developed these concepts, of course, just fantastic concepts, not actually being built, but the idea for organic design, where architecture would grow like a living organism. And he did these fantastic sketches, and they're widely known and shown in various different art publications. And he was actually a professor at Pratt University in Brooklyn, and I had the good fortune to meet him just a few years ago. He was 94 years old. He has since passed. And I had no idea that he was there still teaching, and a friend introduced me to him, and we met there at Pratt. And huge inspiration for just this idea of organic architecture. And then another thing that I learned about, which was from the mid-60s through the 70s, is the architect Glenn Small. Now, mind you, I'm studying in the 80s, so this was work that was 10, 20-year-old work at the time, wasn't current work. And he had first this idea of a vertical city that you see the pencil drawing, and then a magazine published some of his concept on this biomorphic biosphere. This was actually most recently displayed at the Museum of Modern Art in 2023 as part of this big inaugural show of their new architecture division, funded by Emilio Ambas, where he had several of these drawings and models of this biomorphic biosphere. This is his quote: "It's more than a city, it's an environmentally friendly utopia. The living, breathing structure is close to an actual organism. It minimizes the taxation on natural resources, reuses, recycles, collects rainwater, grows food, uses direct natural energy." the estimated population of 11 million would reside in individual modules that, like in the vertical city, would be mobile and flexible so that residents could easily move throughout the stratification of the climate, from the high alpine to the lower tropical. This was proposed for LA, and here's a cross-section view that he drew of it, showing this massive, miles-high structure that in the center part of it are like the public areas, and on the outside tensegrity skin is the residential areas. And he even goes to detail to show where different things would go. So of course this is very fantastic, though he has incredible drawings. And actually one of my favorite videos on my YouTube channel is he actually lives in Joshua Tree. He's a good friend of mine, and we sat down and went through all of his drawings together and had him discuss it. And not only though did he come up with this fantastic idea, but around the same time he came up with a very simple, realizable idea that almost got built in LA called the Green Machine. And what it is a space frame, Buckminster Fuller tetrahedron, octahedron truss that's infilled with these very lightweight, tiny homes. And you see right in the center, though, is an airstream. And he uses that as an example of how these tiny homes would be built, like lightweight airstreams. But he actually came up with concepts for them that were a little bit bigger and would be hoisted up onto these platforms. And the whole place would be ecologically integrated in a community. So you'd be growing your food within this structure and have these homes. And again, they're lightweight and they could be moved. So you could live at this place, you want to move, take your home off of it, transport it to another one. So while I was studying at Parsons, the head of the Department of Environmental Design was James Wines, who founded this company called SITE, which stood for Sculpture in the Environment. And they actually got quite famous in the 70s and 80s by taking big box stores from the Best Corporation, which I think actually turned into Best Buy. And all Life and Time would publish the photographs of these box stores where they deconstructed it. The bricks were just crumbling down on purpose, or the corner just ripped open, or the facade peeled off. So that he got well known for doing things like that, deconstructing architecture. But this drawing is called the high-rise of homes. And it was more whimsical than actually being proposed to do this. But take a huge high-rise megastructure building and infill it with suburban homes. So pretty interesting concept. And this actually hung in the Museum of Modern Art in the 80s for quite a while in their architectural department, right across from the Mies van der Rohe and Corbusier and Frank Lloyd Wright. So he's quite notable. He actually is a good friend of mine and wrote the foreword for my book. So let's see. Okay. Also, in 1969, there were so many visionaries happening in the 60s, Anne Griswold Ting proposed this concept of an urban spiral hierarchy, very similar in that you build this structure with all these spiraling streets and infill it with the various human-scale homes on all the levels. Wolf Hilbert's, this is really incredible. This is a city that's growing out of the ocean. What he proposed is to use a mineral accretion by taking the minerals in the ocean and electrically accreting them into structures so the city would actually grow. Just like coral reefs or seashells would grow, you grow your city. And you could see that at the very beginning of the spiral, it's all finished, and then there's parks in the middle, and people are living there, but the city is continuing to grow, and there's parts of it under construction, just like a seashell grows. So he's really on this page of cities growing like a living organism. And now coming to contemporary time, 2015, Mitchell Joachim of Terraform Studios, this is showing his retrofitting of 42nd Street in New York. And you see this beautiful little stream with wetlands. The buildings are being farmed with aerial drones, easily accessible public transportation without having to go down for a subway. So he also has a great video called the Fab Tree Hab, where he talks about why do we cut down trees, cut them up into pieces, bring them somewhere, and then put it back together to build a house? Why don't we just take the trees and grow them into houses? And he's actually working on that, and he's proposing and building various things where he's growing structures with trees, and he has a fabulous TED Talk where he talks about this Fab Tree Hab, and it's mentioned in my book. And this brings us up to Vincent Calabit, my favorite contemporary architect. These are just conceptual computer graphics of how to rebuild Mosul, Iraq with these bridges. And you see these drones are flying. They would be actually printing these modular units, but they're then built in a way that makes it into a very amorphous, natural, organic structure with water flowing through it and trees growing all over it. And here's a view inside. So you can see the individual units are very basic cubic arch structures. But when they're all put together, you can make this fantastic, beautiful, organic structure. And so he's actually, even though this is not built, he has built this building in Taipei, which is this spiraling tower that you could see is all organically integrated, a photo of it under construction. So this, and there are a number of other architects that I'm very inspired by, but I synthesize all these ideas into an idea I came up with called the 12-Spiral City, a sacred geometric arcology. And of course, we mentioned John Michel earlier with this book, New View over Atlantis, that talked about ley lines and units of measurements. But he then published shortly thereafter in the mid-'80s a book called Dimensions of Paradise. And you see on the cover this crazy diagram of all these spheres and seven-pointed stars. And it's an entire book that goes into detail. And this is just this one quick diagram that shows how this two-dimensional diagram of what he calls the heavenly city plan is generated. And there's profound significance in this geometric relationship, not just in their shapes, but also in the numbers and relationships of the numbers of these forms. So starting with this as two-dimension, and we had seen Anne Griswold Ting's spiraling urban hierarchy, I came up with the idea that the city could grow in spiraling ramps. So here is showing each of the spiraling ramps is 2,160 feet in diameter, little less than half a mile. Makes the whole city a little over 2 miles across. Each of the ramps, as they spiral upward, would go up 144 feet. But the homes would only be 45 feet high, which is typical, human-scale homes like the Victorian homes in San Francisco or like in the West Village in New York City that has these beautiful small apartments that are usually no higher than 4 stories, which is, very human scale. But they're also integrated, as you see, with rooftop trees and gardens. So I had a friend generate before AI. I've been working with AI to do this and struggling. I've not been able to get a real AI version of the 12-Spiral City yet. But what you see here is true to scale. Of these spiraling ramps would grow over time. So there you see in the foreground just 1 level, and then in the background 2 or 3 levels up. Where the ramps intersect in this depiction are what look like sleek modern skyscrapers, but in my mind are much more organic 12-story structures. That's the downtown where the public spaces would be, the stores and galleries and performance spaces and things where that the public needs. And then out on the spiraling ramps are the residential areas. Now this is an AI I found online. This is more of what I think people would want to be building on these ramps. And I even see the whole idea, and the whole thing would spiral up eventually to 12 spirals high, making the entire structure 1,728 feet, which by modern means is not all that high. There's many buildings much, much higher, but it wouldn't all happen at once. And just the idea of 12-ness, to have 12 spirals as a limit. But, it would just start spiral by spiral. But also, the way cities work, cities are actually just clusters of villages. I lived in New York City, but I spent most of my time in the East Village, in the Lower East Side, because that was the type of people I related to, and we all lived there. And then other parts of the city had other types of communities and people living there. So the same would hold true for this 12-spiral city. Each of the spirals would be certain types of culture or events or activities that take place and may grow unevenly at times. Here's a ground view looking up at it and an internal view from one of the levels. And of course, I never show what's going on in the center of it. But of course, in the center would be these community parks and event spaces and for sports or performances and even agriculture. I mean, I haven't paid attention, but I all get a sense of what it would be like. But what this image doesn't quite might show, because we were just doing it to scale to show the proportions of it, is that it would look much more like this, beautifully ecologically integrated. Or of course, like I said, it'll just transition into my latest vision of what an organic three-dimensional city would be like, that would actually be growing naturally over time. Like, I really feel like with this new Earth that we're going to be using design principles that are totally aligned with the way the universe and nature operates. Everything from the way that atoms and molecules are designed, to the way that galaxies and cosmic structures work, to everything on the surface of the planet, from mineral structures and crystals to life forms, plants and animals. They all have a underlying design principle. Who did that? Humans didn't do that, yet we see design all around us. All we need to do is tap into this intrinsic way that nature and the universe operates and use that to grow our cities like this. And what I wrap up with, after all these crazy megastructures that maybe not everyone is interested in living in a huge three-dimensional megastructure urban environment, is just going back to the basics. Terraquaforming, integrating land and water to transform the earth to benefit all life. Like I said, cities are just clusters of villages. So I don't really necessarily feel like we need to go and start to build a huge, gigantic, three-dimensional ecology. We just start by building little eco-villages. Victor Schauberger is an incredible scientist, or future scientist, that lived in Austria at the turn of the last century. And his principles of understanding the way water works is incredible. And it's still not yet fully embraced. And I feel like his ideas will be brought into effect in the way that we work. He even had ideas of water, like, I love one of the quotes is, he said, Newton asked the wrong question. He asked, how did the apple fall to the ground, and discovered the principles of gravity? The question is, how did the apple get up there in the first place? You answered that question, and that's the principle that we're going to be implying to design and build our future cities. It's the principle of life itself, the negentropic or syntropic nature of the universe. Modern physics always talks about entropy, everything's running down, and we use combustion for everything, the burning, the death cycle. Well, what Victor Schauberger talks about is implosion, life-giving forces. The principle that a tiny little seed, when put into the earth, creates this beautiful apple tree with an apple up in the air that eventually gravity can entropically pull to the ground when it falls. But how did it get up there? So, can't recommend studying and learning about Victor Schauberger. There's a great documentary on YouTube that came out in 2008. Comprehending nature, or something like that. That was his term he used. Sorry, I don't have the exact phrase. But humans have understood integrating water and earth for eons. And this is images of 1,000-year-old rice terraces where they went into a completely inaccessible mountainside and terraced it to create agriculture. And here's an image of a man-made lake. We build a dam, and what I love about this is that it has a huge amount of edge, a big permaculture principle that when you make waterways and ponds, you don't just make it round, you give as much edge as possible, because that's the interface of land and water, earth and water, where life thrives, the wetlands. And you could see this is, rather conventionally integrated, but I could see us making these terraquaformed villages where you live on a houseboat. So you can live at one part of it. If you want to move, you just sail over to another part, and then the land is left more open for agriculture and enjoying nature. This is interesting. This is one of these star forts in the Netherlands that's been then turned into a little village, and just showing this incredible interconnection between the land and the water. And I love this one. This is showing, like, it's just a static pond right now, but you can imagine this is on a hillside. When a huge amount of rains come, that pond could become a flowing stream that would then overflow into what you see, a series of swales. So instead of just rushing down the hill and making a big canyon, the swales will divert the water, help it to absorb into the land, and then lower down is another pond to collect it. So these ideas of working with the earth to work with water in the most life-enhancing ways. This is a little village in the Netherlands where there's no streets for cars, only pedestrian walkways and waterways where people can get around the village. And I love this little bit right in the middle of France where there's the conventional farming fields all around it is this place called Ferme-Duc. And you could see clustered on one side are the houses and then some gardens. Right in the middle you could see there's ponds integrated into the gardens and then greenhouses and off to the side a beautiful geometric garden. So this is like a building block of what our villages would be like, consciously integrating the agriculture, the water, the housing in the most beautiful way possible. This is in New York City. This is the waterway that divides Queens from Brooklyn. And there are people working on this. And actually all along the East River are these incredible parks that are starting to bring back wetlands. And even on the Hudson River, and they're putting back oysters and wetlands into these parks. And this is just taking this extremely polluted industrial waterway. It's unbelievable how bad and how industrial it is. And start to bring back the wetlands. Start to bring back housing along it. Like how beautiful would it be to live along a beautiful, natural wetland waterway right in the middle of a big thriving city like New York. And here, I didn't mention, but Bjarke Ingels has been doing a lot of very progressive work. And in a longer talk, I do show some more of his projects he's actually built. But this is just a proposed project for on the coast of Penang, China, to make these cities in the waterway, to infill it in and have the water integrated into these cities that could be built right now. And we're ending with this vision of what Plato described Atlantis to be, concentric rings of earth and water. So these are ancient ideas of how we can build and inhabit the earth by integrating earth and water in these very conscious, beautiful, and sacred ways. So thank you so much. Of course, the book is available over on the side, and we'll leave this up if you'd like to scan, but also on the table are the QR codes to make it very easy for you. If you just want to jump right to my YouTube channel, click subscribe to help the channel grow, or on my website, it's very easy to go to the website and click subscribe for the newsletter. So I'd love to have you, jump on board and help this and share this with other people. So I don't know how we're doing time-wise, but that's what I wanted to come and share with you today to hopefully inspire you all. And if there's any questions, I'd love to, help talk about that if you're interested in asking anything. Well, I actually got through this quite quickly, quicker than I thought. That's why I edited out a lot of things. So we do have a good amount of time. That was only 33 minutes and 33 seconds when I looked at my timer. So yeah, in some ways, anyway, questions. First off, questions. I think there is a microphone if people want to, or here we go. There's someone helping people with questions. Thank you. Can you hear me, Harlan? Not yet. He's going to get your tuned up in just a moment. Yeah, he'll bring the mic over. He's got the mic, and he'll start, and then you'll get.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. You hadn't turned it on. Oh, there we go. There we go. So I have my idea why you would choose 12 for your height of your spiral cities, but I wanted to get your take on why 12 was the number.
Well, first of all, there's the 12 spirals, right? And it just seems like a nice amount, and just the 12ness. 12ness is like a very underlying principle. It's interesting. Why do we have 12 signs of the zodiac? Why are there 12 hours on a clock? So 12 just seems to be this underlying principle of how the universe operates, and that's about it. It was just intuitively guided. Like I didn't put a lot of thought into it. I'm like, okay, there's 12 spirals. How high should they go? 12. That was it.
Well, that was kind of my point. I mean, I think we have to look at everything through a spiritual filter, if you will, if you have some sense of where we're all from. But that's exactly what I was getting at, is that, the 12 was related to a lot of astronomical as well as spiritual sides of things. So that's what I was wondering. So thank you.
Yeah, exactly. It's intuitive. A lot of my work comes without a lot of thought. I just get an idea, and it's intuitive. And that's pretty much it.
Perfect. Thank you.
We have up front.
Any other? We got one up front. Just a quick question about maybe floating cities incorporating some of these ideas. Have you been involved with that?
The floating cities.
Floating.
Actually, it's interesting because I showed Vincent Calabet, who is interesting. He's not widely known in the U.S., but internationally he is, and he's doing projects all over the world besides the U.S. But I usually show, and in my book, I do show his ideas for these floating cities. And what's interesting about him is besides being above water, he shows the structures underwater to be interacting and using underwater aspects. And I think floating cities and seasteading is a great idea. And it is interesting that I don't mention that at all, even in my talk about terraquaforming. And yet, I do think that is a lot of potential in being able to inhabit the seas with floating cities. And yet, right now, let's just work with where we are here on Earth, right? And why not? So definitely a lot of potential in floating cities. And yeah, the fact that I didn't include Vincent Calabet's proposals for these, I think they're called aquaria, and they're beautiful renderings. And his website is just fabulous, vincentcalabet.com, and shows all of these different projects. So thank you for bringing that up. And I know there is something called seasteading, which is working in that direction of creating cities. And of course, one of the benefits of, if you do it far enough offshore, you're not under any government, right? You could be in international waters and create your own floating nation. So it is a very good idea. And of course, you know what boggles my mind though? Cruise ships. They're building more and more of these mega cruise ships. And the cruise ships could actually be the beginning of these floating cities. Instead of just paying to go on a cruise and eat all this food and stuff, why don't we just take cruise ships and turn them into our communities and live on them, right?
Funny you mention that. There's a few, I know of at least one cruise ship that's like an apartment cruise ship. You can
buy them. It cruises the world. I heard about it.
You buy the room and it cruises. It's
right, yeah, and it's cruising the world, and you can just get on and off wherever you want or rent it out, but it's true. You pay to be your own private residence on a cruise ship. So it's moving in that direction, and I really think that would make a lot of sense.
Hi. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much. It was just beautifully presented and great information, so thank you. My question is, have you heard of biogeometry with Ibrahim Karim et al.?
Yes, and of course his disciple who just passed away, Robert Gilbert. Yes. So yes, and it's very interesting you bring that up because I've known about it for a number of years and I just have barely scratched the surface of it, even though it's so aligned with the work that I'm doing. And I've never really fully dove in and studied it. And yet he's incredible. And this work of biogeometry and it's integrating it into architecture is really, really important. And in some ways, it's a miss that it's not included in the work that I do. So I really do appreciate you mentioning it. And for whatever reason, there's only so much that I focus on and integrate. And as much as I've known about it and have looked at it, I've never fully, studied it or integrated it. But it is definitely very important work. And like I was mentioning, he founded it, Ibrahim Karim, biogeometry, and then Dr. Robert Gilbert has the Vesica Institute, where he has courses teaching on it. And even though he just recently passed, the courses are still available. They're quite expensive, which is one of the things that shied me away from diving in and taking those courses. And the little bit that I looked, I'm intuitively aligned with much of that information. So that's one of the reasons why I never fully dove in and studied it, because I feel like I'm coming at the same kind of information from my own angle.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hi. This is a kind of a quirky question. When you were showing the pictures of the crystal cities, I was wondering if the Emerald City in The Wizard of Oz if there might be some, the time period was kind of similar, and I was wondering if there was any overlapping influence on that.
What an obvious and great question. Who knows? I mean, that book was out in 1919 and circulating in some kind of architectural communities, and Wizard of Oz came out, and it could either have been done because they did know about it, or just the whole, as Rupert Sheldrake talks, the the resonance of being in the noosphere, with morphic resonance, right? So the fact that it was already thought about may have influenced, and just the name Emerald City. And it's true. And even just recently, someone was posting on Facebook about these visions of crystal cities. So there's no way to ever to know if there was a direct connection between them. But of course, there is, clearly some overlap between it. And I'd like to, since you brought up Bruno Taut's work, I most recently came across another paper of his that I didn't know about. And it was a little bit more down to earth, less visionary and more practical about how they would go about building. And he actually did do real architectural work in Berlin and other German cities at the time, making these apartment buildings and areas that were somewhat more conscious and more humanly designed to create community. But what he proposed, though, and the reason why these cities were like these crystal cities is and this is something, if you think about even the way the U.S., when it was settled, all of the towns had their church and their commons, and the town was built around that there's a city center, and that he was proposing these crystal cities and city centers, crystal cities or crowns of the cities, which was the community center. But instead of it being focused on a cathedral and the church, it's focused on this more spiritual connection to the earth. That we make these community centers that are these beautiful crystal community centers. That's the focus that the city then grows out from. And it was very interesting to find that paper where it was talking in much more practical terms about how you would create a new city in a realistic way by designing this center of the city that has these community principles, and that the city would then grow around it.
Another question.
Good morning. Just a practical question. So what is the energy source, and how do we take care of business on the afterthought? That is recycling, composting, those kinds of things. Do you give it the engineering kind of?
Yeah, very good question. Well, Buckminster Fuller addressed the idea of recycling and waste. He says you go into a forest and you don't see any waste. Everything in nature is in a natural flow. And we could easily employ that the way humans inhabit the earth, where there is no such thing as pollution or waste, that we see every byproduct as something to be recycled in a continuous stream. And even our current recycling practices don't really fully embody that. It's a step in that direction. So the idea of everything being recycled and thinking about that is very, very important, and to know that everything is part of a cycle and not just something to be thrown away into a landfill there is no way to throw it, is one of my favorite sayings. But then you brought up the idea of energy. So we see in the universe that everything from atoms continuously spinning to the Earth rotating and galaxies, they're all spinning, and the sun shining on us, giving us all of our energy continuously. And it's not having to be done in some way that's creating pollution like we are by burning fossil fuels, or even there's this concept that, not all oil is fossil fuels. They do drill these extremely deep wells, and it seems that there is what's called abiotic petroleum that is just mineral-based oils, and there's huge amounts of it. But even so, the idea of 0 point or free energy has been around for a very long time. There's many scientists that have been developing this and working on it. And the problem with accessing free energy right now isn't the technology. Many people have the technology, understand it, and are understanding it better and better. It's the underlying consciousness. The way humans are thinking right now in this very us or them, scarcity, 3D mechanistic worldview, which is still ruled by war and, like I say, us or them and stuff like that, doesn't allow for free energy to be employed. So before we can get free energy, we need to evolve our consciousness to be in harmony with all humans, not fighting against each other, understanding that the universe is an abundant place, and that and not use it to fight and destroy, but to use it in the most beautiful, way that the energy in the universe normally works. And also, people will say, where are you going to get the money to build this? And what I like to say is, if you build these cities using money, they're not going to be what I'm talking about. Where does a tree get the money to grow? The seed falls on the ground. Does it pay the earth for the minerals? Does it pay the sky for the water? Does it pay the sun for the light that shines on it to grow into this beautiful tree? And that's how I see these cities growing. And also, in these cities, your shelter will be met. Your food will be provided for. You won't need to pay for these things, so you can then live, as Bruno Taut said, to help build the city out of love, out of what you do it the way you want to do it. So I really see this shift. And even Buckminster Fuller, one of my favorite quotes of his that I carried around in my wallet for years until it wore out, is, I see the hydrogen atom behaves like a hydrogen atom. And he uses hydrogen because that's what 99.99% of the universe is seen to be. And then hydrogen atoms, combine together to make helium and all the other atoms like that. So all atoms behave the way they do without being paid to behave like an atom. And he says, if we're doing what the universe wants us to do, we don't need to have to be paid to do it. It's only the temporal power structure dictums of the ages. That's Buckminster Fuller's terminology for the necessary use of money. And so, it's going to take a major shift. I realize that. It's not going to happen immediately. But with this shift of consciousness, I do see that we can align with the way nature and the universe operates. Nowhere else do I know besides humans use money to operate, right? There is energetic exchanges of which money is representative of, but there is a certain control paradigm in money that kind of enslaves us. And I think we have to break free from that false matrix and, awaken to our own, divine power that we have as divine sovereign beings and see that. And, it's once, and the shift that's taking place is internal for each one of us. It's not this external ascension, but this internal one that each one of us is waking up to, and then it also comes about externally through that. So that was a great question that, got me to touch on some really important subjects that I think about a lot. So thank you very much. Do we have any hands up or any more questions? Up, we do. So who's bringing the mic? Is Mark there with the mic, or do we have the microphone?
I see you now.
Up, he's coming.
John, do you want to do
We're getting
more?
ready to wrap up my talk. I think we were supposed to go until exactly right now, 11:30. So I think we have time, a couple of minutes just to wrap us up. But yeah, so one more question in the front here. Thank you.
You don't have to go into detail about this, obviously,
Yeah.
at the time. But you had mentioned ley lines, and just kind of as a wrap up in the sense of positioning, the cities, the positioning and.
Right. So, besides thinking about the Earth in these, more subtle energetic ley line and energy grid, there's the obvious aspects of why cities are placed where waterways are and coastlines and geographic nature of the planet that makes sense for where you would want to put your cities. And then, though, tapping into that more subtle aspect, that once we are more aware of that would make sense. And also, we think of the Earth as very static, like the way the maps are and everything, but it's a living, growing organism. And people are talking about maybe new land masses or things shifting. So there's all kinds of possibilities, and holding that in mind that things can happen. And even we know of the legends of past civilizations such as Lemuria or Atlantis, which there's no trace left of. So just as those have completely disappeared, there's also the possibility that new places can appear, right? It's not just a one-way street that things disappear. So, yeah, I think that reality is way more malleable than we're led to believe in this very limited 3D perspective that, is the consensus, reality that we're kind of enmeshed in right now. And that by opening up to these higher dimensions of consciousness and the fact that we can interact and be creator beings, we can actually create things on the Earth unprecedented. And I feel like all of the fantastic visionary things I presented, as far-fetched as they are, could actually be realized quicker than we can imagine because of this ability and the fact that we're shifting. So I really thank you all so much today for being here. It's an honor to be able to share this. And thank you, John. So really appreciate it.
Thank you, Harlan.
Oh, Mark's going to get that
Yeah,
microphone.
Mark's not going to. Can we have some mic here? There we go. Thank you all, and thank you, Harlan, very, very much. Very, very interesting presentation. We'll all convene again at 1 o'clock, and we'll have Robert Edward Grant. Thank you.